a lot of times there was this blind following of your master instructor. It kind of came from, maybe Kung Fu show or others. There was this blind allegiance, and I think a lot of people took advantage of that. And I believe that martial arts begins and ends with respect, certainly, right? So you should respect your teacher, your sensei. But I also think in order to have it, you have to give it. And so the culture in our school is very much senior person is respectful to the white belt. It used to be kind of like in a lot of places, the master instructor kind of stood with the arms folded and was unapproachable. Who's to say that's wrong? But I know in my school, I want it to be different.
I am very lucky to be here with Sensei Dave Kovar. And again, I've said this with Tom Callis. Is Sensei appropriate? You're on Stories with Sensei?
It's just fine, absolutely.
Let's talk about, I want to get into the moment for you. Like, where did martial arts take the core, the seed for you, for all you've grown with?
So it's interesting. So in the 60s, my family, we lived in Montana, and I was probably 5 years old, so this would have been the mid-60s, and we were on a road trip somewhere, and I couldn't tell you where, but I saw a silhouette of a guy doing a flying sidekick on a billboard. Okay. And I didn't know what it was, but I knew that's what I wanted to do. It was kind of like, I didn't find martial arts like martial arts found me. And it was like, and this was the mid-60s, just the common thought was that kids didn't do martial arts. It was considered for tough guys, et cetera.
Right.
And plus there wasn't a lot of places to do it. So my folks wouldn't have anything, to do with it. And it wasn't until, so in 1971, I started 7th grade, I started wrestling. That was my first combat sport. And my older brother, Tim, who ended up being my business partner for 20 years, went away to college, and he did a year of martial arts training, came back and said, hey, you gotta let Dave do martial arts. So I started karate officially in 73, and it was just like, something I'd always wanted to do, and I fell in love with it instantly.
That's amazing. Do you remember, for me, I think about, I was born in 73, so the 80s were for me, and there was kind of an explosion in martial arts.
Right.
And Sensei Fairboards, I spoke about this recently, kind of like the Karate Kid in the 80s. Like there was these explosions that I really remember. I remember Black Belt Magazine, these things. That 73, 74 era that you're talking about, what was prevalent
then? It was Kung Fu and Bruce Lee. Yeah, and that was the Kung Fu show. It was like Green Hornet as a kid a little bit, but it was really Kung Fu, and then seeing Enter the Dragon is right about the time I started. And that was, it was really interesting because back in the 70s, there wasn't a lot of kids training in the dojos. It was all, the guys that were in the dojos were the guys you have now that go to MMA schools. They were the 18 to 25-year-old, primarily adult males, you know.
Right.
And so I was like the school mascot because I was one of the few kids. And then what's interesting is I opened up my first school 6 months out of high school in November of 1978, right? And I had no business going into business, but it just kind of fell into it. And I had a few kids because I just kind of enjoyed working with kids, and I seemed to kind of have a pretty good sense with it. But most of my students were the same people. And then the big boom was Karate Kid came out in 1984.
It was great, yeah.
And overnight, the industry changed. And I was kind of at the right place, right time, right product. Mm-hmm. And we just, up until then, I was struggling to make the business work. I was painting houses by day, certain times of the year to supplement my income. And I remember one particular scene, this would have been in like 1986. I was painting that day, and I still had paint in my fingernails. I was driving to the dojo and seeing a line of parents holding their kids' hands, waiting to enroll in my school, and we just blew up. It was just really an amazing period.
Yeah, you recently went to the Martial Arts History Museum, Martial Arts Museum, with Tom Callis and Sensei Fairboards, and what was that day like for you? Because you were just talking about the 60s and Green Hornet and 73 and what it was like, and then the 80s and the explosion. Now you're there with some really good friends, and at this spot that you've been part of with the Watch This History. What was that?
It was very nostalgic to kind of, and so many of the people there I actually know personally, which was really cool to see, you know, like, oh, I know that guy. And, I had a chance to interact with him when I was a kid. And it made me, very nostalgic and very appreciative of being a part of, the martial arts culture, and just kind of also reminded about how martial arts is kind of mainstream now. Like people are not completely shocked when they ask me what I do for a living and I say teach martial arts. And for my whole career, it's like, what do you do for a living? You can do that? No one really expected that's, what's your day job? I get that. What's your day job? So it's kind of cool to see that it's actually, for the most part, a respected industry. And it's also what's interesting is, when I first started teaching, like I remember trying to get into the schools. This would have been in the mid '80s, trying to go do a school talk for a bunch of kids about like anti-bullying or something. And I remember the consensus among teachers was principals, are you kidding? We're going to let a karate guy come here and talk to our kid? We don't want him fighting on the playground. They had no clue. It was such a barrier to get past. And it took like decades. And now it's kind of like the general public gets the benefits of martial arts for the most part. Still, they don't necessarily understand it, but it's viewed completely differently than it was.
Do you think that, I was just talking a lot about the history and the journey, do you think in a way like whatever veil was there has been pulled off for a good reason? Like when you say more people come to it, or do you think we just look at it differently now? I kind of just think about that history of, like you said, like don't let a martial artist in here, or these must be tough guys. Or always when we were kids, like, are you a black belt?
Right, sure.
Like what does that mean? Don't mess with him.
Yeah.
Do you think that some of that's gone away for the better, or has it just changed? Do you see things differently?
Yeah, I think it depends. I could look at it like a couple different ways. So one of the things, like with the advent of the UFC, everything changed, right? And I think in a lot of ways for the better. I think there was a lot of pre-UFC, there was a lot of more charlatans, there was a lot of more kind of fakes, a lot of guys kind of capitalizing on the mystique and the fantasy of martial arts that weren't real, weren't legit, that did kind of pull a fast one over their students' so to speak. And that mostly disappeared. But the other downside is that because I have a love-hate relationship with MMA. I love the athleticism and the skill and the discipline that goes into it, and I know a lot of those guys. The part that I'm not is comfortable with is it kind of makes, if you're not doing UFC, there's a lot of people that think that traditional martial arts has no value anymore, which is so not true. You know what I'm saying? And so like I see an erosion of kind of some of the the courtesy and protocol. Like, it's a little thing for me. It shouldn't be a big deal, but I don't like calling my school a gym. To me, it's a dojo. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of like, and not a coach, but a sensei. And it sounds like semantics, but it's a kind of a different relationship to me, that I want to make sure that I do my best to help preserve and pass on.
I love that relationship. It is a different relationship, and a dojo can certainly be anywhere that we make it, and a sensei can be anyone in any discipline, I would think, right? But talk about that relationship a little bit then. Again, I'm always staying in the context of history where we started, but where do you think the relationship is now, maybe in your dojo as an instructor, a sensei to students? Has that relationship changed?
Well, yes, I think this for the better. So, there was kind of there was a time back, when I say back in the day, our back in the days are all different based on how old we are, right? But for me, my formative years would have been the 70s, right? And then there was a couple things that happened. First off, the style difference back then was so dramatic. Like let's say you and I met somewhere and we both found out we did martial arts. First thing we did is we asked what style are you? Right? You don't hear that as much anymore. But if you're a Taekwondo guy and I'm a Kempo guy, guess what? We we can't be friends. That was kind of the mindset.
It's so true.
It's so silly. And we're mostly past that now, right? Which is really cool. And by the way, you could tell what style a guy was by the way they warmed up at a tournament.
It's so true.
You can't do that anymore. Everybody moves it because there's only so many ways to elbow bands, and we've learned from each other, and we've all kind of blended and grown, right? But I also think that a lot of times there was this blind following of your master instructor. It kind of came from, maybe Kung Fu show or others, there was this blind allegiance, and I think a lot of people took advantage of that. And I believe that martial arts begins and ends with respect, certainly, right? So you should respect your teacher, your sensei. But I also think in order to have it, you have to give it. And so the culture in our school is very much senior person is respectful to the white belt. It used to be kind of like in a lot of places, the master instructor kind of stood with the arms folded and was unapproachable. Who's to say that's wrong? But I know in my school, I want it to be different. I want to respect you, and I hope you respect me. But what I can do, the best thing I can do to earn respect is by my example, and by the way I treat you, and by the lifestyle I live, and versus demanding it.
Yeah. My sensei, if I could call him that, in drums, who's also up in Sacramento, he says something all the time, and I put music and martial arts together. We're sitting there trying to do the perfect this, like we're trying to do the perfect this. Right. And he says, look, we're on the same road. I'm just a few miles down the road. That's why I can do this and you can't. So I respect you all the same. I just know that you're here, and as you come down the road, you'll be joining me here. And that idea that we're just in a different spot of the learning, but we're still whole and we're still on this journey. It's always fascinating. I always think about that. We're just in different spots on the road. Like I may know a little more of this, but you know a little more of this, you know? And I think that's where the respect part comes in.
Absolutely.
One last question. I was thinking as you were talking about this and change and history again. How would you describe what you do if you didn't use the word martial arts or karate, or if we pulled that out of it?
I do my best to strive to teach people to be in the moment at their best.